So after what happened in Ferguson, with, an African-American teenager getting killed by a white police officer, and the grand jury failing to indict the police officer, then there was a lot of marches and a lot of unhappiness in the country. And right before I left to come on this trip, I had given a BBC talk at the Abbey, and then I was at DFF, and people again asked me about it because people are really seeking some kind of spiritual way to understand this craziness in our lives in America right now. And then I arrive in Singapore, and what's the first news story I hear is that in the case of Eric Gardner, who was a black man who was selling loose cigarettes, which is illegal. Selling loose cigarettes, how severe is that? And confronted by a police officer, the whole thing was videoed. And the cops came, they put him in a chokehold, which is against police policy in New York, pinned him to the ground. On the video, it's amazing. One cop is like smashing his head into the ground. There's 3 other cops around looking on. And his last words were, "I can't breathe," and he died right there. Even though the police officer heard him say, "I can't breathe," and he should have let up at this point, and the other officers shouldn't have, even if one guy's out of control, they should have pulled him back, but they didn't. He died, another way, black guy doing some small illegal thing, white cop coming, using excessive force and killing him. So this is, it was like, and then they had a grand jury, again, investigate this. This happened a couple of months ago. And so what happened when I came to Singapore, the first piece of news I hear is that grand jury also failed to indict the police officer. And I was just like, oh my goodness, what is going on? This is so unfair, and it's not like the unfairness of the American quote justice system is anything new to me, because I do Dharma work with inmates, so I hear all about the system, from all sorts of perspectives, and I call it the injustice system. Yeah, and I'm not saying that everybody in prison should be liberated and that nobody committed crimes. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying that what we pose as being a fair system is very subjective and not at all fair, and especially when it comes to race. Racism is very apparent in the American justice system. And so this was just another example of it. The one thing that I did find very heartening was when I looked on the news, there are demonstrations all across the country, and the people in the demonstrations are not just black people. It's like everybody is fed up. And, there's, from the point of view of a black person, they would say, look, this has been going on for centuries in this country. Why are the white people only paying attention now? Yeah, but, which is a good question. Why are they only paying attention now? But at least people are paying attention now. At least this is a change, And I'm really hoping that enough people protesting and really saying, look, we're tired of this kind of thing happening. We don't want to live in a police state, will really affect some change. Because I'm seeing that this kind of, and I know that the term police state is rather strong. It's a strong term. But it is when the police use undue force you know, and are not held accountable for the undue force that they're using. And I was noticing as I was traveling to Singapore, they have posters in different places, especially now in the airports because they're afraid of terrorism. And it says, if you see something, say something. So if you see somebody doing something illegal or suspicious, say something. Okay. But then, and usually it's like, yes, of course, you say something if you see something suspicious. But then my friend who was driving me to the talk that I gave before I got on the plane, he told me that on one of the busy streets in Seattle that he was riding down that day, there was a man walking in the middle of the street, a black man walking in the middle of the street. And my friend was wondering, what do I do? Do I stop and say, do you need help? Do I ignore it? You know, do I call 911 and get the police involved? And it was like we started discussing that because it's really difficult, you know. You don't necessarily want to stop, and how is he going to get in the middle of the busy street to help the guy? But on the other hand, now, after what has happened with the police in this country, do you really want to call? It made us think, do we want to call the police and get the police involved? Because this guy could wind up dead simply for walking, not only because the cars hit him, but because if the police try and come and take him, maybe there is a flare-up and he winds up getting killed. And I began to think, you know, this is really bad for the entire country. Because if you see something, you should say something. If somebody needs help, you should call for help. But now if people are not trusting the police to come and help, even in a situation where you should trust the police to come and help, then what is happening? You know, this is not kind of good for the country. And people really need to think of the broader effect of, you know, the police action on the country as a whole. Yeah. Because I began to think, you know, if I'm having a difficult situation, would I go up to a cop and ask for help? I don't know. Yeah, and I'm white. So anyway, this is talking from like a social viewpoint, yeah. What I want to do because I feel it's necessary to talk from that viewpoint, but I also want to talk from a Dharma viewpoint at how to look at this kind of thing. And so, as I pointed out in the BBC I gave a few days ago at the Abbey, there's a lot of karma involved from previous lives about this. Yeah, but karma from previous lives is not an excuse to do nothing. Yeah, I mean, in the thing of Michael Ferguson and Darren Wilson, there was clearly some kind of karmic connection between them, as there was between Eric Gardner and I forget the name of the cop that killed him. You know, some kind of karma there. But just saying, oh, it's due to karma, is not suitable, is not proper, okay? Because first of all, karma does not mean fatalism. Karma does not mean things are predetermined, yeah? So you can't look at this kind of thing from a Buddhist viewpoint and just sign off and say, oh, well, it's karma. That's totally wrong, okay? Because you know, this is a situation concerning sentient beings, and as I said at my previous talk, every single moment we have a choice about what to do. And in every single moment, you know, we can either operate on automatic and let our afflictions run us and take us in that direction, or every single moment we also have the choice to act with compassion. And compassion very often requires a lot of courage. And even a small decision like that can take us and take the whole situation in a very, very different direction. You know, small decisions can have lots of power in the long term, you know. So I was thinking of this situation, you know, to be able to have compassion, not only for Eric Gardner, not only for the Black community and for Gardner's family, not only there, but also to have compassion for the police officers, you know. And because it's so easy in this kind of situation to blame one party and then have sympathy for the other. So some people blame Gardner and Brown, and other people blame the police officers. But in either way, when our mind is blaming, there's no compassion. Yeah? So we can attribute responsibility without blaming. Okay? And there's a big difference there, because when you blame, there's anger, there's vindictiveness, there's resentment. When you attribute responsibility, there's clarity of mind, and there can be compassion, and then we can move forward in a good direction. Okay? So I think we need to see who's responsible for what, you know, but to realize that everybody in this situation is under the control of afflictions and karma. It's not like in this whole situation anybody was free of afflictions. Yeah? Everybody was acting with an afflicted mind. It's just some people's minds were more afflicted than other people's minds, and some people, because of the strength of their afflictions, acted out in a way that, you know, created incredible suffering for others and incredible negative karma for themselves. Okay? And so to be able to have compassion for the people who create the negative karma. Yeah? And this whole thing has really, you know, made me think of the Rodney King situation that happened like 20-something years ago in Los Angeles, which was the city where I lived when I was young, near, you know. And, you know, he was doing, there was a high-speed chase, just like in the movies. What you go to the movies and you think is enjoyable, so watching this high-speed chase, that was reality. And he was doing that. The cops were following him. They finally got him, and once they got him, they put him on the ground, and they beat him and kicked him, and it was awful, you know, and it was all videoed. Okay? And again, this one, I think, I can't remember exactly, but I don't know if, I think there might have been a trial for the police officers, but they weren't convicted. Yeah, but anyway, the cops got off, you know. And so then, of course, the Black community rioted. Yeah, and then the Korean grocers who, you know, had stores in the community, their property was destroyed. And the whole city was a mess because of this. And, you know, I remember thinking in that situation, you know, I could have been any of those people, because as long as I have afflictions in my mind stream, who knows what I would do? I can't sit here separate from the situation with my nose up in the air and say, I would never act like the cops, or I would never act like, you know, I would never sell illegal cigarettes, or I would never, you know, walk in the middle of the street or whatever, which was what Michael Brown was doing when the police, you know, when Wilson engaged with him. I can't put my nose in the air and say I'm none of these people. Actually, I'm all of these people. Yeah, because I have afflictions in my mind stream, and if you put me in a very dire situation, I don't have so much control over my mind that I can say with 100%, you know, security, oh, I would never do that. Yeah, because as long as there's afflictions, who knows what we'll do? We really don't, you know, because I'm sure none of the cops got up that morning and thought, I'm going to kill somebody today. And none of the people who were killed got up in the morning and thought, I'm going to be killed today over some small illegal thing. Yeah. But there you go. You get put in a situation and everybody's acting with afflictions and suffering happens, you know. So to be able to train the mind to have compassion for everybody in the situation, and at the same time to hold people responsible for whatever their part was in the situation. Yeah. And holding responsibility doesn't mean blaming, you know, and we can hold responsibility and have compassion for people, because we're all under the influence of afflictions and karma, aren't we? All of us are. Yeah? And so incredible amount of compassion is really needed in this kind of situation. Yeah? But action is also needed, you know? And so that's why, I mean, I saw all these people closing down the Brooklyn Bridge. I think it was the Brooklyn Bridge, one of the major bridges in New York City, you know, and the highway and on the one of the coasts in Manhattan, closing it down. I thought, good. Of course it's inconvenient for all the people stuck in traffic. And I really empathize and have compassion for them. And I hope nobody had to get to the hospital and was stuck in that kind of traffic. Yeah. But on the other hand, you know, maybe people will pay attention. And I was very heartened that some of the people in public office, government officials, were speaking out today, you know, about what happened. And so, you know, to have compassion and to also do what we can to institute change so that there is not systemic, there is not suffering caused through systemic prejudice and systemic dysfunction. Yeah? And so to do, you know, to work in all aspects, to work on our own mind, and to work in society to reduce suffering. So we have a lot of work to do.